Hello, and welcome back to the Striha Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Parker Striha, and on today's episode, I'm going to be making my official predictions for Super Bowl 57. I'm by no means a professional, but I do love talking about sports, so thank you for joining me. So, we're just going to jump right into it. I'm just going to kind of break down my thoughts on the Eagles, kind of their stats and stuff for the season. Then I'll go to the Chiefs and what they did. Then I'll go position head-to-head matchups, so like I'll pretty much talk as an example, which team do I think has the better quarterback, better running back, stuff like that, or even just better group, or position group, I should say. And then we'll kind of do that, and then I'll kind of add any extra thoughts I have, and then make my official prediction. So, jumping into the Philadelphia Eagles, they finished the regular season with a record of 14-3, but two of those losses I don't know exactly how to feel about because they did come with Gardner Minshew as the starting quarterback. So they didn't have their MVP candidate quarterback out there for 2 games, but nonetheless, they did still lose. 14-3, tied for the best record in the league with the team they're playing in the Super Bowl, the Kansas City Chiefs. But great team, dominant all season. Their leading passer was Jalen Hurts with 3,701 passing yards, 22 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Their leading rushers were Miles Sanders with 1,269 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 4.9 yards per carry. Jalen Hurts with 760 yards, 13 touchdowns, and 4.6 yards per carry. They had an overall team total of 2,509 yards, 32 rushing touchdowns, and as a team had 4.6 yards per carry. So they were easily one of, if not the most dominant run team and most successful running team in the entire league. And I mean, I think Jalen Hurts does play a huge role in that. You can definitely see why he was a MVP candidate. That's over 4,300 total yards, which I mean, you'd like to see more from a quarterback, but still, I mean, impressive overall touchdown numbers. 35 total touchdowns on the season is really good. Going into their receivers, A.J. Brown had 88 receptions for 1,496 yards and 11 touchdowns. Devontae Smith had 95 receptions for 1,196 yards and 7 touchdowns. And Dallas Goedert had 55 receptions for 702 yards and 3 touchdowns. Obviously, I'm not going into every single person that ran the ball for them, caught the ball for them. These are just kind of the highlight players for each of those stat groups, I should say. But, I mean, A.J. Brown, they traded, I believe, the 18th overall pick in the 2022 NFL Draft for him, and it couldn't have worked out any better. He cemented himself as one of the best wide receivers in the entire league and had, I believe, career year in every single statistic. I may be off base with that, I may be wrong, but I do believe he had a career year. And I think I heard that he broke the Eagles single season receiving yards record, which I thought was pretty cool for a guy who had only been there. Like, this was his first season there. He hasn't even been an Eagle for a full year yet, and he's still putting up numbers like that. And it just shows how good he really is. And then Devontae Smith, more catches, less touchdowns, less yards. But, I mean, you can't ask for a better number 1 and number 2 receiver other than maybe the Dolphins, maybe the Bengals. I mean, there's not a lot of teams that have a number 1 and number 2 receiver that can put up numbers like this. You can't double cover one because the other one's just going to beat you. So you really got to pick your poison. And then Goddard is, I believe, in my opinion, a top 5 tight end in the league. One of the better guys. He was hurt for a little bit this season, but definitely still put up good numbers despite missing a couple games. And then some defensive highlights. Free agent signing Hassan Reddick had 16 sacks. Javon Hargrave, Brandon Graham, and Josh Sweat all individually had 11 sacks apiece. And the team as a total had 70 sacks, which led the league, and I believe is tied for the 3rd most all-time for sacks in a season. I mean, this defense, you couldn't have asked for a better defense this season. They were elite at every single level. And looking away from their pass rushers, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who they acquired from the Saints for pennies on the dollar, led the league with 6 interceptions. He might have been 2nd or 3rd, but I know he was up there. And then Darius Slay and James Bradbury had 3 interceptions apiece for a team total of 17, which was tied for third in the league. I mean, you really, overall offense and defense, this team really, in my opinion, doesn't have a flaw. I mean, the biggest flaw you can maybe point out is wide receiver 3, but I still think guys like Quez Watkins are still freaks. I definitely still think they can make plays and they can beat you. I, off the top of my head, cannot think of a solid weakness that this team could get bit by, a weakness that could harm this team in a playoff run. I think they're probably the most well-rounded team in the entire league. And it's going to be really hard for the Chiefs to match up to that. But, I think they match up pretty well. So moving into the Chiefs, they had a regular season record of 14-3. Like I said, tied with the Eagles for the best record in the league. Their leading passer was Patrick Mahomes with 5,250 passing yards, 41 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. Their leading rusher was Isaiah Pacheco, who had 830 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 4.9 yards per carry, for a team total of 1,970 yards, 18 touchdowns, and 4.7 yards per carry. So still a pretty good running game, but compared to the Eagles, it's nothing. That's not anything that the Eagles couldn't have done. They put up insane numbers compared to that, almost double the rushing touchdowns. I think, 500 or 600 more rushing yards, less yards per carry, but only by 0.1. So, you really can't put a whole lot of thought into that one. Their leading receivers, Travis Kelce had 110 receptions for 1,338 yards and 12 touchdowns. Juju Smith-Schuster had 78 receptions for 933 yards and 3 touchdowns. Marquez Valdez-Scantling had 42 receptions for 687 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Jerick McKinnon had 56 receptions for 512 yards and 9 touchdowns. Now, Travis Kelce doesn't shock me. I do believe he is the best tight end in the league. You can make the argument for a guy like George Kittle as being a more well-rounded, but he also is not as available as Travis Kelce has been the last couple years. Kelce's a freak, one of the best, if not, you can make the argument as the best receiving threat in the entire league, just what he does. But I'm most impressed with Jerick McKinnon, the 56 receptions for 512 yards and 9 touchdowns. Definitely not numbers you'd think you'd see out of a guy who, at the start of the season, was maybe second or third string, and he comes in and is one of the team's top receiving targets. You can't go wrong with that. He's definitely going to be a game changer in that Super Bowl. And then defensive highlights. The only player I highlighted was Chris Jones, who had 15.5 sacks and 17 tackles for loss. He was an absolute monster this year. I do think he kind of single-handedly beat the Bengals for the Chiefs 2 weeks ago. So you can't go wrong with him. The Eagles are gonna have to double team him unless they really, really trust any of their linemen to hold up. Which if there's a team that has offensive linemen that'll hold up to Chris Jones, it's definitely the Eagles. The team had 55 total sacks and 11 total interceptions. They were, I believe, second in the league in total team sacks, just behind the Eagles, but that's still a 15 sack difference between number 1 and number 2, which is just astronomical. That's crazy that there's that big of a difference. Maybe there's that big of a difference every year, but I don't really pay much attention to that. So let's go into position head-to-heads. So I just have quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, O-line and D-line, linebackers as a group, cornerbacks as a group, safeties, kicker, punter, and head coach. I'm just going to talk about which team I think is better at that respective position, and then we'll kind of total those numbers up and look at them at the very end. Quarterback, I do believe it's the Chiefs. I don't really think there's a strong argument that can be made that the Eagles have a better quarterback. Yes, they have a healthier quarterback because I don't know if Patrick Mahomes is 100% from, I believe, the high ankle sprain he suffered a couple weeks ago. It's definitely close. It's not like the Chiefs have the best quarterback in the league and the Eagles have the 30th best quarterback in the league. This is a top 10 or top 1 quarterback against a guy who you could put top 5, top 10, and I don't think you'd see a lot of resistance from that. Running back, I think the Eagles have the better running back group. I think they have the better running back number 1. Miles Sanders, I think, is just a more well-rounded running back and a more proven running back than Pacheco. And I mean, you saw or heard the running numbers I put up earlier. The Eagles are just an overall better running team, even if you take out Jalen Hurts' numbers. A wide receiver, I also give to the Eagles. I don't trust the Chiefs wide receivers, even with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, as much as I trust the Eagles wide receivers. You can't really match up the Eagles number one wide receiver. You can't match up with the Chiefs number 1 wide receiver. The Eagles, A.J. Brown is better than Juju Smith-Schuster, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, whoever you want to say. And if I'm being completely honest, I think the Eagles wide receiver number 2 is better than the Chiefs number 1 wide receiver. No disrespect to Juju Smith-Schuster. I love him as a player, but I just think, especially this season, Devontae Smith was just better. Tight end, I'm giving to the Chiefs. Like I said with quarterback, it's still close. Like, this isn't a number 1 against number 30. I do think Travis Kelce is the best tight end in the league. And then I also do believe that Dallas Goedert is a top 5 tight end. So this is a very close matchup, but it's one Travis Kelce wins. Offensive line, I give to the Eagles. I trust them more. I think they've been more dominant this season. And I don't really have a hole that you can pick on and you know you're going to win. They have arguably the best center in the league, one of the best left tackles in the league, probably the best right tackle in the league. And I mean, their guards are extremely good too. Defensive line, I'm giving to the Eagles. Other than Chris Jones, there's not a whole lot on that Chiefs defensive line that I really will pound the table for as arguably or possibly one of the best at their position. And the Eagles are just extremely deep on the defensive line, just like they were when they won a couple years ago. On the edge, Josh Sweat, Brandon Graham, Hassan Reddick. I don't know if I said Josh Sweat already. Robert Quinn, Derek Barnett. Like, that's an extremely deep edge rushing group. And then you look in the middle. Fletcher Cox, Javon Hargrave, Ndamukong Suh, Linval Joseph, Jordan Davis. Like, they can just rotate these guys out, and it's going to be really hard to... I don't know the exact word I'm thinking about or trying to get in my head, but having an extremely deep defensive line makes it so much easier to maintain pressure throughout the game because you're not getting the same guys in every single play, getting tired every single play. Like, you can keep bringing in guys so certain players can get rest and then come back in the next series or the next play. And then overall, I think just makes your defense a lot scarier because you can maintain that pressure for a full 4 quarters or even a 5th or 6th quarter, depending on overtimes. Linebacker, this is kind of a tricky one. I could give it to the Eagles because technically I believe Hassan Reddick is listed as a linebacker and has been one of the best pass rushers in the league, but I'm kind of taking this strictly as off-ball linebackers. I don't really think either team has a distinct advantage. I like both teams' linebacker cores. I like Kaiser White and TJ Edwards for the Eagles, but I also like Nick Bolton and Willie Gay for the Chiefs. So, I mean, I'm kind of just giving them a tie for this one. Cornerbacks, I'm giving to the Eagles. I don't think the Chiefs' number 1 corner matches up with even the Eagles' number 2 corner. Bradbury and Slay have been arguably the best cornerback duo in the entire league, and I think it's going to be really hard to look past that. I think it's going to be really hard for them to get exposed or beat this game, but it's not completely out of the picture. Safety, I'm giving to the Chiefs, but it's still very close. I just trust their room a lot more than I trust the Eagles. Yes, C.J. Gardner-Johnson on the Eagles is really good, but I don't really trust any of their safeties other than him. I just think the Chiefs have an overall better and more proven safety room. Kickers, I'm giving it a tie. I like Harrison Butker more, but Jake Elliott has the experience in games like this. I believe he was their kicker for that Super Bowl they won a couple years ago. So, I mean, he's been in games like this. He knows how to win games like this, and I think that But I mean, I think it's still a tie. I don't really think either team has a very big advantage when you really look at it. It's about as close as you could get. They're still both top 5, top 10 kickers in the league, in my opinion. Punter, I'm giving to the Chiefs. I believe it's Johnny Townsend, more than I trust an old Brett Kern. He's going to be able to put the Eagles in scarier situations and more jeopardizing positions than I believe Brett Kern can for the Eagles. And then head coach, I don't think this is any surprise. I'm going with Andy Reid. I think he is one of the best head coaches, maybe not of all time, but at least of the 21st century. I think this is his 3rd or 4th Super Bowl he's been to. He's only won, I believe, the one a couple years ago against the 49ers, but just an overall great head coach. He knows what he's doing. Big games are not anything new to him. And I mean, this is the biggest game Nick Sirianni has ever been the head coach for. And that's kind of all there is to it. So when you look back at it, I have the Eagles with 5, the Chiefs with 5, and then 2 ties. So I do think this game, in my opinion, is going to be super close. I don't think there's really a 100% foolproof, distinct advantage that either team really has. Some teams are just better at one thing, and the other team is just better at something else, and that kind of goes with every single game in every sport. And that's really all I got to say about that. I just think it's going to be a very close game, just looking off of that. My overall thoughts for the game, I'm not excited for the halftime show, but that's not the game, so I won't really get into that. I do think these are the 2 best teams in the league, though. I think you did get the right, scripted, so you did get the right NFC and AFC team, but I think this is probably the best matchup you could have asked for. The Bengals-Eagles could have been good just because I like the Bengals running back and wide receiver room a lot more than I like the Chiefs, but Patrick Mahomes is going to keep them in the game regardless of what their running back and wide receiver groups look like. So I don't really think this is going to be a blowout by any means. I don't think this is, a lot of the talk has been Eagles are going to win. A lot of people think the Eagles are going to win by a lot. I don't. I think the most they win by is maybe 6 or 7, barring field goals or an overtime touchdown or something. I don't think the Eagles are going to run away with this. A lot of the guys on that team have played in a game like this, but a lot of them haven't. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Miles Sanders, Jalen Hurts have not played in a game like this. The offensive line, for the most part, has. Isaac Seumalo has. Jason Kelce has. Lane Johnson has. They have leaders in that locker room that can really help get them through a game like this. And I guess my overall prediction, I think the Eagles are going to win. My final prediction is 35-28 for the Eagles. Super Bowl MVP, I'm going to go Hassan Reddick. I know it's kind of a weird thing. You don't really see a lot of defensive players win Super Bowl MVP, but he's been killing it all playoffs, all regular season, and I don't really think that the Chiefs have an offensive tackle that's going to be able to stop him, and he's really going to be a game wrecker in my opinion. He's going to make Patrick Mahomes' life extremely difficult, and I'm not going to predict. I might predict. I think he will finish this game with, if he doesn't finish this game with at least 2 sacks and a forced fumble or something like that, I would be extremely shocked. I don't trust those tackles against him, and I think he's going to have the game of his life if I'm being completely honest. But as always, I'm your host, Parker Striha, and this has been the Striha Sports Podcast. Our random sport fact of the day is that Super Bowl 57 is the first Super Bowl to feature 2 black starting quarterbacks. As always, thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to hit that notification bell for whenever a new video gets posted.